the bringing of the pollination, from the male flower to the female flower. We can think about pollination is the process that plants need to happen for fertilization. So there's kind of like a two-step process that the pollen has to be brought to the female plant before fertilization can happen. There's a lot of different routes to pollination. So this is, again, we talked about last time how plants get a little funky, and the way things happen is that the pollen has to be brought to the stigma, the pollen landing pad, which often plants will secrete nectar, so a little bit of like sticky, sugary stuff. And that has a twofold reason. One is that it will allow the pollen to stick to that area. And then the other reason is that it'll attract pollinators. It'll attract other organisms to come and drink the nectar or taste the nectar, get that sweetness, and then thus they're attracting that other organism to bring the pollen from flower to flower. So a lot of routes to pollination. It could be just wind. Wind blows, and it blows the pollen from one flower to the other flowers. Insects, birds, bats. There's lots of different ways that pollination can occur. Sometimes it's water. But the point is that regardless, it's the transport of the pollen from flower to flower. Let's see if this is going to work. I'll show you a pollinator at the end, or pollinators. Let's answer this question. What is the evolutionary significance of a flower with larger, brightly colored petals? So A, the wind is significant. The wind is a significant factor in pollination, especially because of the large petals. Do petals have anything to do with pollination necessarily? Like they want a bigger stigma, maybe, right? So the petals being large, indirectly, I would say. Such plants are usually self-pollinators and do not rely on external factors for pollination. That seems weird. In general, these are aquatic plants. Did we say anything about aquatic here? That seems like this is going in a weird direction. Water aids in pollination, irrespective of color and odor, which again, this part is true, but does it apply here? I don't know. That seems weird. These flowers are more attractive to animals that act as pollinators. That sounds pretty good. Such flowers produce only microspores or megaspores. Not both, but I don't even understand what that means. So I think D sounds the best, right?
And animals that are pollinators, they actually typically, they even see color even like more vibrantly than we do, because birds and insects, they see like ultraviolet light.
Yeah. So
the flower petals, like the way we see them, for them it's even more vibrant. So the petals definitely definitely are there to attract the
to
animals.
bring them, draw them toward it. Yeah. Thanks.
So I have a couple of plants that are just like, they don't really flower, they only have like leaves. Are we gonna talk about how those kind of plants reproduce?
It depends on what kind of plant they are. Because they might not be an angiosperm.
Okay.
So it could be a whole different thing of the way that they are pollinated.
I've got stuff like that at home. Even things that are angiosperms actually just have the way their blooming time works, and the way that they're like, if they naturally live in a certain environment, sometimes certain environmental conditions have to take place for them to want to bloom. And maybe like in your household, like that plant may be like native to a place where there's certain environmental conditions that trigger flowering that just aren't present in your house, so it just never happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I have plants, like I have an inch plant at home, and like it's native to like Central America, but it never flowered. Like it's completely healthy and it just grows like crazy, but it never flowers. But it is a flowering plant. Like it grows like, I googled what the flowers look like. They're like little pink flowers, but mine has never flowered, probably just because the conditions aren't right for flowering.
Right, it could be the humidity levels aren't right, the amount of sunlight per day, the amount of dark, there's all kinds of issues that could happen as well, that you might have like.
And I have a Christmas cactus. It actually used to flower all the time, and I had my windowsill, and it actually hasn't flowered in like over a year because I ran out of room on my windowsill, and I had to move it into a shady spot. Like, so they're growing fine, but they're just not flowering because they're not in the sun.
So you never know. A lot of people with orchids too, like I have
orchids.
my orchids at home, and they will not flower, so I bring them here, and they go crazy here. There's something with the conditions at my house that the orchids are like, we don't like it here. Yeah, so you never, it could be not an angiosperm, it could be an angiosperm with the wrong conditions. Yeah.
Or maybe they're just not old enough. I have some perennials,
Yeah.
and like the bird of paradise flower, I have one at home, but I don't think it's old enough yet to like start.
Oh,
It has to put out, it's a plant that has to put out a certain number of leaves, and it has to be like a certain age
Oh, wow.
to flower for the first year. Like, it has to be, I think, like 3 to 5 years old to like flower for the first time, and I got mine, I don't know the exact age of mine, I just got it from a greenhouse, so I'm just gonna have to wait for it to flower one winter.
Interesting. Yeah, plants are wacky. You never know. Thank you. The last thing we're going to talk about are hormones. So this is another thing that, again, with evolutionary relationships and thinking of those taxonomic trees, is that we, eventually everything comes from some common ancestor. There's a lot of things that we have in our bodies that also plants do. So like hormones, for example. The point of hormones is to regulate metabolic reactions or pathways in an organism. So we're going to look at a few different kinds of hormones that plants have and utilize to regulate metabolic pathways. So one, we're going to talk about 3 different examples. One are auxins. Auxins do 3 main things. One is they control phototropism. Here's photo in there, the word photo. And this is the whole idea that plants, if you put a plant in a window, what it will do is it'll start to lean a little bit toward the window. Because what is it actually leaning toward? Not the window, but, yeah. Plants out in nature typically grow up toward the sun, but in artificial settings, they'll grow that way. That's what we call, again, phototropism. They'll grow toward the light. Apical dominance, if you remember, apical means the tops and bottoms of the plant, the shoots shooting up, the roots down. So this will help apical buds to grow, but it's not making the girth of the plant grow bigger, just the tops and the bottoms. Plants have little tiny, when you see like leaves, new leaves forming at the top, there's usually like a tiny little bud between. If you wanted, let's say your plant is getting really tall and skinny, you can start to pinch off or cut off. You can even just like cut off the end of the plant, but you can even just pinch those little buds that are forming at the top in between the leaves that are coming up, and it'll make the plant stop growing tall, and it'll start forcing it to grow this way, because you basically like cut off this little apical dominant trait. Root branching, so again, this goes with apical dominance. These two go together. Remember that apical, we're talking about not only here, the tops and the bottoms, the tips.
How to get from the center, does it affect the whole plant?
If you cut the apical buds off?
Yeah, like from the whole middle thing.
Oh, if you cut from the middle?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll start growing this way. So like bushes, if you ever see like people who sculpt their bushes in certain ways, that they'll start cutting the top so that they'll start growing bushier, like this way. So there's a lot of tricks. This is an important concept when people do bonsai, the technique of bonsai. Bonsai is not a kind of plant, but it's a technique on working on plants where you force plants to be smaller in size. And the 2 things that you do is not only cut those apical buds, but also you have to unroot the plant. And so you actually like pull the plant out of its soil, and you dust off the soil, and then you cut the roots the tips of the roots as well. So this technique really applies to both the budding parts and the rooting parts, and then the two of those things prevent the plant from getting really big. So you can bonsai any plant by doing this technique. And if you look up, if you're interested, you can look up bonsai techniques, and you can see like oak trees that are little tiny, they'll grow this big because somebody is working on apical dominance on the tops and bottoms.
If you go to like Chicago Botanical
Yeah.
Gardens, they have like a bonsai gallery, and they have like trees that are like, it says it's like 100+ years old, and it's like this, it's like a miniature like version of like the tree.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, in doing this apical dominance, what it's going to do is it's going to, if you kind of chop that, in auxins, what they do is they will grow the length. So in kind of thinking about this apical dominance, it really accounts for all of this here together in terms of the plant, it growing taller and rooting more. Gibberellins, this is what you're working with in lab. So let's pay close attention to this. Number 1, gibberellins stimulates seed germination. Yeah, the term germination refers to emergence from the seed. So one of the pieces of data that you're going to look at, and this is a mistake that a lot of times students make when writing up this lab, is that they constantly refer to the height of the plant. Even when a question says, look at your germination data, and then students will go and look at their height data. Make sure you are reading what the question is asking for, because you're looking at two different kinds of data when you are writing up your lab. One, you're looking at how many seeds sprouted. That's what we mean here. When we're talking about germination, how many seeds sprouted? Emergence from the seed means sprouting. So that data, you are looking in your quadrats, your 4 sections, you are seeing how many seeds sprouted from the dwarf regular and then the dwarf treated. The normal, regular, and the normal treated. Hypothetically, between the normal and the treated, which should have more germination because they were sprayed with gibberellins? Right, the treated should have more emergence. So just looking at dwarfs, in your dwarf regular section, you might have like only one that germinated, which is kind of normal. Dwarfs do not naturally produce gibberellins, which means that dwarf seeds, they just don't break well or germinate from the seed. So I'm not sure what the average is, but let's say it's 2 out of 10 on average will germinate from dwarfs. That's totally normal. So let's say in yours, you only get 1 that germinated. But in your treated section, maybe you got 3. So that shows you that the spraying of that gibberellic acid did have a positive effect on germination. In your normals, maybe you got 9 that germinated, and in your normal treated, maybe you got 10. So you're looking at those differences. Make sure you look at what questions are asking for, because this is an important piece of data that you need to look at. And again, students will just go right to, oh, we're talking about height, but no, some of it is talking about germination. Okay, so this seed germination comes from gibberellins or gibberellic acid. Fruit development. We don't get there. We don't wait long enough to see that we get actual peas, right? They're pea plants. So if we did this through the course of the whole semester, one of the other pieces of data that we might look at is how many actual pea pods are produced. But we don't get there. And then this is the other one. You're measuring the height. So you have been taking two kinds of data over the past few weeks. You've been taking data on how many germinated, right? Because you have been writing down how many seeds grew and how tall they grew. So maybe unbeknownst to yourself, you have been taking both of these data and you didn't really realize, oh yeah, I have been tracking germination in addition to how tall they grew. So we will look at these today.
I've just always wondered, like, what's the difference between a fruit and a vegetable?
Fruits have seeds. So some vegetables like peppers, for example. When you cut open a pepper in the middle, does it have seeds? So is it a vegetable or a fruit? It's a fruit. Tomatoes have seeds, so they're technically a fruit. A lot of times what we have done, or what people have done over time, is just called anything that's more savory a vegetable, and anything that's sweeter a fruit. But technically, that's not true.
Vegetable doesn't really seem like a biological category. Like a fruit, it can be distinguished as a ripe ovary with seeds.
Right.
But a vegetable is, it's pretty much, it could be something like if you eat leaves, or if you eat like a carrot, then we eat the root part. A vegetable's very loose terminology.
It is. It's
Fruit
kind
is
of
not,
ridiculous.
yeah. Fruit is very well defined, but vegetables the loosest term.
Right. Yeah. It's vegetables kind of not a thing.
Biologically.
Yeah. Good. Really good question. Thank you. The last kind of hormone I want to talk about is ethylene. Ethylene is given off as fruits ripen. They release this gas, ethylene. So this is pretty interesting that as they release more gas, they'll start to drop their leaves. Just like think about your tomato plant at the end of the summer into the fall, it starts losing leaves, right? The leaves start getting kind of yellow in color. So it's starting to drop, and then it will literally drop the fruits off. That's because ethylene starts to build up. So the other thing about ethylene, well, we'll ask this question before I mention anything about it. So if you have a whole bucket of apples, you go apple picking, and the first apple you pick is really, really ripe, and it's in the bottom of the bucket, and then you put all these newer apples on top of it, think about what that apple is going to do to your whole bucket of apples. So one rotten apple spoils the whole barrel because the rotting apple produces ethylene. Yeah. So ethylene, this is one thing that you need to be a little bit careful of, especially in your home, with any of your fruits. Like if you have, for example, a thing of strawberries, and one of them is really squishy in the bottom, and it's very ripe, it will start to release ethylene, and it'll make the other ones ripen quicker. So you want to often separate them from each other. The little, there's a new thing, the banana hats. Now people are buying those. The ethylene gets absorbed rather than going into the air and affecting the other ones. What I typically do with bananas is I will pull them apart, because the ethylene will travel in that top part of the bunch. And so that if you have one that is more ripe or ripening faster, it'll transport ethylene outside as well as inside. The other thing about bananas, it's good to kind of keep them, they ripen really quickly, keep them away from your other fruits and vegetables in your house, because they will promote everything else ripening faster because of the release of ethylene.
So what you're saying though is that maybe I can use it to my advantage, because sometimes I buy a cantaloupe and
Yep.
I want it to ripen way faster.
Then stick the ripe bananas around it.
Sounds good.
You can put them on top. Yeah, so that's true too. If you wanted something to ripen faster, you could expose it to a riper fruit. Yeah. get some good tips in life here, right? One of the possible consequences for a plant with a defective gene for the production of gibberellins or gibberellic acid, the production of gibberellic acid, would be A, rapid rotting of the fruit, B, an increased rate of lateral root development, C, the development of fruit without fertilization, D, a longer dormancy period for the plant's seeds, and E, an increased rate of stem elongation. So we're talking about the dwarfs. Which one do you think?
D.
Yeah, good. Okay, so D is the best choice here, right? Is that if there's not a natural production of gibberellic acid, they're going to have a longer dormancy period